So as a negotiation professor and coach, people always ask me how to formulate a negotiation strategy. So whether you're preparing to ask for a raise or convince your significant other that you should go to Hawaii for vacation this year, or maybe trying to persuade your colleagues that your ideas are worth adopting, spending time developing a strategy is key. In this video, I'm going to explain what I mean by a negotiation strategy. I'll give you practices for formulating a strategy that yields really great results while also building a strong relationship between yourself and those with whom you're negotiating. Plus, you'll hear the story of how I went to great lengths to cut 25% off of my rent for my apartment when I was in law school. It's true, and it's a little bit extreme. So first, when we're speaking of negotiation strategy, we're talking about both the planning for the negotiation and then the execution or process of the negotiation. So let's start with planning. First thing you want to do is spend your time thinking about what success looks like for you. And when I say success, I don't mean success in terms of bottom lines, but rather success in terms of what are the underlying goals and interests and needs you have. So for example, right, you might say at the end of the negotiation, I want to have an office with a window. To me, that sounds a little bit like a bottom line. But if I said to you, well, why do you want the office with a window? You might say, hey, I've been at this workplace a long time. I want to be treated as other colleagues are with my own tenure here, or I want to feel like I have appropriate status.
What I think is happening here is you're having a panic attack.
So hearing that, right, what I would say is like, okay, so your goals are to be treated fairly, to have appropriate status, and what else? And you might say, well, I also just like natural light. Okay, so the third is you want natural light. So then those are your three interests, right? To be treated appropriately, to have appropriate status, and to have natural light. The position is, I want an office with a window. But there might be all sorts of other ways of getting those three things you want short of an office with a window. So that helps me understand what a good outcome looks like to you. And that's the first piece of getting a meaningful strategy. It's like getting into a car, right? You have lots of tools in that car, four-wheel drive, safety sensors, GPS, but if you don't know the destination, having the tools won't help you all that much. Second, you need to think about what does success look like to them? Like, what are their goals? Lots of times I'll get a lot of pushback from a client on this question because they're thinking like, I don't care about them. That's their problem. When I'm working with a client, sometimes a client will say something like, hey, I'm paying you to help me, not spend time having me think about success for them. But what I want to say is really great negotiators are actually trying to yield wins both for themselves and for the other side. Because if I understand what success looks like for the other side, it's going to be so much easier for me to frame issues in ways that appeal to them. So if I'm trying to persuade someone, I can do it from what does the world look like from my own perspective, or what does the world look like from their perspective. So if my boss is gonna say, if I say, well, my boss just wants to keep me from getting a window and make sure my pay is as low as possible, that makes it really hard for me to find something that's a win-win for both sides. It also kind of represents a cynicism that I hope isn't true. But if instead you say, well, my boss probably wants to avoid setting a bad precedent, they might want to look strong, they might want to manage the bottom line. They might want to avoid having a whole bunch of other people asking for windows. That helps us kind of actually not see the boss as some villain, but actually gives us a perspective on how they're going to be seeing this negotiation.
Now that is what I call a beautiful morning.
I want to have idea of my goals. I want to have idea of their goals. And next, I want to use that as a way to envision what are some outcomes, what are some options that can help us both achieve our own goals here.
But I'm only doing this because you called me rude, and I take that as a compliment.
Maybe offices with windows are in really short supply, but what might not be in short supply is a budget for things like continuing education, or maybe a retention bonus, or maybe for that interest in light, I can actually negotiate to get a furniture budget that includes some special UV lighting, right? All of those things are ways to honor your interest in getting respected, getting the status that you want, and getting light, but that might not be setting a bad precedent for the boss or putting the boss in an impossible position. All of this preparation kind of arms us so that instead of having a negotiation that is a contest of wills, we actually can have something that can be productive. But you're not quite done yet, because the next thing you want to do is some research into market norms or external criteria or standards that can help us be persuasive in getting the outcome that we think is best for us. Years ago, when I was a law student, I had just taken a 110-hour class on how to do this well, and I was entering my final year in law school. And I was looking for an apartment to rent, and I had 2 other roommates. So found an apartment about a mile up the road from Harvard Law School. It was a 3-bedroom apartment. Landlady was asking for $1,800 a month. So because I am a nerd and because I wanted to test every single thing that I learned, I went and I knocked on the door of every single person who lives in this apartment building.
It's me.
Who is it?
And yes, this is a true story. And now some people would not respond, but when people did respond, I said to them like, hey, can you tell me how much you pay in rent? And of course, some people slammed the door in my face, but other people actually told me. And so then what I did is I went to the tax assessor's office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because the tax assessor's office actually kept floor plans of all of the apartments because that's how they determine the rent. And so I then built an Excel spreadsheet and I went to the landlady and I said, I know you're asking for $1,800 a month. Can you help me understand how you arrived at that number? So what I was really doing there was asking her for her benchmark, her criteria. And she looked at me and she paused and she said, how about $1,700? And I was like, listen, I'd be prepared to pay $1,800 or $1,700. What I really want to do is avoid haggling with you. Just kind of curious how you came up with $1,800. And she kind of looked at me confused. And then I said, I've done some research and I think an appropriate number for this unit would be $1,369.84. Let me explain how I arrived at that number. And as I tried to explain to her, looking at the benchmarking that I had done, about a minute into that, she looked at me and she was like, okay, sounds good, $1,369.84. I was stunned. I was like, I can't even believe this just worked. I went to my 2 future roommates and I told them how much money we were going to be paying the next year rather. And they're like, oh my gosh, we need to take that class. Now, obviously this is a one-off story, but it's a story that shows the value in benchmarking. And there's a lot of research to support that if you have a precise number and a reason for it, it's incredibly persuasive to the other side. The next thing you need to do is think about, what am I gonna do if I don't reach an agreement with the other side? So in negotiation, we call this understanding what our best alternative to a negotiated agreement is, or our Bagna is. Now, oftentimes when I'm working on a negotiation strategy with a client, they get really frustrated when I ask them to think about, well, if you don't reach an agreement, what are you gonna do? Because they're like, I'm hiring you to help me reach an agreement. I don't want to spend my time on that, right? Or they'll say something to me like, well, we have to reach an agreement with them. I mean, they're our only, let's say, supplier. And then I'll say okay, but if you don't reach agreement, what are you going to do? And they'll be like, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. This is a real problem because in negotiation, we always have to decide, should we reach a deal with the other side? And the only way we know how to do that is if we know whether whatever we're being offered is better than our away from the table alternative, or what's called our Bagna, our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So when I'm preparing my negotiation strategy, I need to think really hard about what is my Bagna. And if my Bagna is bad, then I need to do whatever I can to improve my Bagna before I go into that negotiation. So let me share an old silly story that is true from, decades, eons ago when I was in high school. So many, many years ago, I persuaded my parents that I should go on the high school trip to Europe over Easter break.
Someone here wants in on this exclusive opportunity.
This was perhaps a sign of my nascent success in negotiation, as my mom was absolutely petrified to send me on this trip. Unfortunately, however, while we were there, I lived an example of one of my big weaknesses in negotiation at the time. So we were brought to a leather factory in Florence, where we were given an elaborate explanation of how amazing and rare the leather was that emanated from this factory. And at the end of this incredible, amazing tour, we were invited to buy beautiful leather jackets for $350. At the end of their sales pitch, I thought no reasonable person would ever say no to this incredible deal. And so I bought a $350 jacket, even though in fact I had done no research, had actually no money, and had no permission to buy this. Imagine the shock and dismay when my parents learned what I had done and quickly demonstrated that they could get a similar jacket at Macy's for $150.
In fashion, durable and elegant rarely go hand in hand, so put that back.
This is just an example of why it's really important in negotiation to know about your Bagna before you go into a negotiation. Because it is the case that if we don't know that, it's really easy to fall victim to something that is called an escalation of commitment error, which is that we've invested time, energy, and resources into this negotiation, and we become psychologically committed to a deal happening, and then we reach something that's actually worse than their Bagna. So, how do we come up with a good negotiation strategy? First, we want to think about what is our idea of success or a good outcome. Second, what is the other side's idea of success or a good outcome? Third, how can we use that understanding, that nuanced understanding of each of our interests, each of our ideas of a good outcome, to brainstorm really creative outcomes that would meet those interests? Fourth, what are the benchmarks or objective standards that can help us decide which are the best of the outcomes, the most fair, the most sustainable of the outcomes on which we agreed? And finally, is this outcome that we've come up with better than our away from the table alternative or Bagna? Now, once you're at the negotiation table, so that's all preparation, right? Once you're at the negotiation table, it's time to set up a process that supports the strategy that you've created. So that means really leading at the negotiation table, which leading for me means actually suggesting a process or an agenda that is going to be really different than just haggling. So when I sit down, I want to say to the other side, let's not just exchange offers here. What I really want to do is understand from you what's important to you, share what's important to me, and then can we spend some time in light of that understanding coming up with some outcomes that can actually meet both of our objectives. Oh, and once we do that, can we look at those options and then agree that we're going to use some kind of fair standard or criteria or benchmark to choose the best one? So what you see me suggesting here is a process that will support the strategy we just talked about. So let me give you an example of why a process like this can be really empowering. Many years ago, I had an offer to leave my teaching job at Harvard Law School and teach at another law school. It was a really long negotiation, and we were towards the very end. Basically, what I realized is that the offer from the other school was just substantially better than what Harvard was offering. So we had followed the process I had laid out, but my Bagna was better. So at the very end, I emailed the dean saying, thank you so much for working with me on this. Thanks for being creative. Regrettably, later this morning, I'll be accepting the other offer because what they're offering is just better. 30 minutes later, I had an email from the dean where she completely changed all of her offers and gave me exactly what I wanted. One of the beauties of the process that I laid out is that it's really helpful to suss out whether someone is bluffing or whether someone is actually being genuine. Because if at the end of the day, the dean had really gone to the full extent of her authority, she would have let me walk away. But because I had followed this process, felt that we had been as creative as we could, and this literally was the extent of her authority, and I knew my Bagna is better, it was easy to say, I'm sorry it didn't work out, we tried. And of course, when you get another offer, you realize, aha, this wasn't the end. So when it comes to negotiation strategy then, you want to know what's a good outcome for you, know what's a good outcome for them. Brainstorm in advance as many creative outcomes as you can. Do benchmarking to protect yourself from exploitation and understand what your away from the table alternative is. At the table, negotiate a process that allows you to follow and take advantage of the full set of outcomes, the full set of preparation that you've done. Thanks for listening to some of my stories. I would love to hear yours too, so definitely put them in the comments and definitely watch the next video.